Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Happy Monday, Dr. Paul. How are you?
I'm doing well, and we're going to, once again, solve all the problems of the world.
Easy.
With our fingers crossed. At least we're going to make an attempt to alert people to what's going on. And everybody that believes in freedom and liberty and the rule of law has to do something about it.
Yeah.
And we're inviting them in to participate, and we appreciate our viewers tuning in to us each day. But there's a lot going on. We can't escape the fact that the big issue is the economy and the relationship, especially, to the virus and the lockdown. But it's also that they don't talk about, the Federal Reserve contributing to the downturn in the economy. But anyway, those are big issues. But we are going to talk more, especially about the virus and the vaccines and our friends like Bill Gates, who's going to take care of us. And if one shot doesn't work, he says maybe we'll have to have three.
Yeah.
And even though the odds aren't even very good that they're ever going to get one, and that's my contention. It's a corona type of virus. It's a cold type of virus, and you don't get vaccines very easily. And it reminds me so much, and they're referencing now the thing that I've talked about a lot because I was there when we voted in 1976, and being one of the two that voted against it, and the vaccine killed more people than it saved. And there were very few deaths from the virus. But anyway, the vaccine is being worked on. But something else has come up this week, Daniel, that I find fascinating, and that is all of a sudden, the haters. There are no haters on the Republican side. They're all on the Democrat side. And I'm being facetious because they're bipartisan. Yeah. It's just the Democrats are so obnoxious about it, and they tell bigger lies. But anyway, there's a goal now on the Democrat side. They've decided that Republicans lie too much, and that Trump is a better liar than they possibly can. How can they be better liars than the liars on Russiagate?
Yeah.
But anyway, they've decided it. It's out there. New York Times says it, that Republicans lie. They lie so much that they disqualify themselves. They are not real candidates. And therefore, they do not want to give Trump the credibility of being a real candidate, so they are suggesting strongly that Biden, not debate him. They don't want to give Trump too much credibility, but maybe they just don't want to give Biden too much exposure.
Yeah, well, that was Joe Lockhart, who was the press secretary under was it Obama or Clinton, who said, whatever we do, don't let Biden debate Trump. And you're right, because they say, well, he lies about everything, because he exaggerated when he was campaigning. Okay, I'm glad no one else does that, right? No one ever lies when they're making campaign promises, right? I think you had a novel suggestion for that.
I'm sorry I never used it during when I was a candidate at one time, because I think it'd be real neat, at least to make a point. I think all candidates, when they're making a public statement, should do it under oath.
Yes.
Wouldn't that be interesting if all those people up on the stage there, propagandizing and distorting and all this hyperbole, and say, well, you're under oath. Remember, you're under oath. What a change that would be. But anyway, let's talk about where we are on the vaccine. They're talking about a vaccine maybe by the end of the year. If it is, it's not going to be a safe vaccine. That's the way I believe. I don't believe that they can get a vaccine really that's going to be perfect. Gates is one of the most horrible people that I know because he's so slick and so rich, and he carries a lot of weight, and he's behind all this. He and Fauci, and of course with alliance with Black Lives Matter and George Soros, all this stuff. They're much more organized than I ever dreamed. So I don't think high on their agenda is health. I for some reason, I just don't think I want to put my life in the hands of Dr. Fauci. I don't think that would be a wise thing to do. But there has been some research and a little money spent. I think the taxpayers coughed up $9 billion, but that's chicken feed now. Anything under $1 trillion is no big deal. So they're still working on it and a race for it. But it's 50 or 60% effective. That's not too bad, but it's ridiculous, especially taking the risk and no proof is going to do anything. So there's so many things about the vaccines and of course the vaccines. It's always related to the mask and lockdown. So it's everybody's on pins and needles. As soon as the vaccine comes out, the lockdown is going to disappear. That's where the vaccine is just going to be another problem, and they're not going to use that as an excuse to open up the doors to let free people make their own decisions on what's best for their health and taking a risk. So it's going to continue this way. I don't think there's any magic, and even they're in their own glory, and not only in the lockdown, they pick and choose. If you're demonstrating on the street for their causes, you can do anything you want. But if you're demonstrating for one of our causes like freedom, oh boy, let's lock them up.
Yeah.
So it's a big deal on the same way when they open up. The opening up isn't like, okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
That's fortunate for some of our states that never seriously locked down, or countries like Sweden.
Yeah.
They didn't lock down, and they don't have to put up with it. But the bureaucrat, the politician, loves locking down and say who's essential, who isn't.
Yeah.
And then opening up is the same way. Churches are not essential. They're on the bottom of the list, and you lock them up, but you can open up some Antifa and the Black Lives Matter radicalism on the street. That'll be okay.
And even when the bars are open, they have to close at 10 now, because I guess Corona goes to sleep at 10 o'clock, or wakes up at 10 o'clock to get people. But the vaccine issue was really interesting because it's a fine line. If you remember back in March, Fauci said that the virus may disappear just like SARS did in 2003. And then he had some hearings over the summer in Congress, and he was asked about what's the quickest this vaccine has ever been created. And he said, well, one of them he said was, well, that was for the SARS 2003 outbreak. But unfortunately, the virus died before we got that vaccine in production.
Yeah.
So I think it's a fine line between that in 1976, where the vaccine did more physical harm to people than good. And I just was looking at an article, the actual bottom is 50% effectiveness. So you basically flip a coin with this. But the thing is, it's no biggie because Pharma is going to get paid anyway. The U.S. government is funding the production of doses, several different companies, as you pointed out many times, whether they work or not. So it really is like the pharma industrial complex is temporarily taking over for the military industrial complex. They're going to get paid. They don't care if the F-35 is no good. They're getting paid. The same with this vaccine.
Now, there must be some resistance building because they're already preparing next propaganda scheme, and that is and they've had meetings on this, and they debated, how do you persuade people to take a vaccine when they don't want to? And the longer it goes before it starts, the more resistance there's going to be. But unfortunately, they have the upper hand and they can terrorize people, and there's still people lining up and they want this. I'm just hoping they will wake up and realize that there's a much more healthful, safer, more efficient way of handling, infectious diseases. And the other thing about this about the vaccine is what about, we're talking about the danger, and I really believe in it, is no sweat. Not only it's not their money, but there's no liability.
Yeah.
Pharma's scot-free.
That's right.
You talk about coming up, the far left and the progressive, and fortunately there are some that are very honest and don't just call names, and they're concerned legitimately about this, big business. And of course our big complaint is that the combination of big business and government is the problem. That's how countries drift over into a fascist system. It's not the way the far left pictures. They march in with the Marxist program off the bat. But to exempt them from it, and there's some powerful people in leadership, especially in the Senate, that believes that should be the case.
Yeah, on both sides. What's even probably the most insidious thing I've seen this week is you can't call it anything other than a psychological operation to try to trick and convince Americans into taking this virus. And a good friend of ours, who's a viewer and a good personal friend, sent me this over the weekend, and it's absolutely fascinating. If we can go to that first clip. This is a clinical trial. This is a test that was done in July. And the issue is, how do we convince people to take the vaccine? And they used people in different control groups to test which messaging could force people to get it. Let's go through a couple of them quickly. There's too many to mention, but you'll see really quickly how insidious this is. Here's one of the groups. 1/15 of the sample will be assigned to this intervention, economic freedom, which is a message about how COVID-19 is limiting people's economic freedom. By working together to get enough people vaccinated, society can preserve its economic freedom. So basically, if you resist a vaccine, you like the shutdowns, you like people being poor, you like people being sick. Let's do a couple really quick. Here, let's move on to the next one because we don't have enough time for all of these. Self-interest message. 1/15 will be assigned to this intervention, which is the message that COVID-19 presents a real danger to one's health. Even if you're young and healthy, getting vaccinated against COVID-19 is the best way to prevent oneself from getting sick. Let's go to one more. There's one more I want to read. This is one because we see a lot of anger breaking out, Dr. Paul. People are punching each other for having masks and not having masks. Part of this sample will have the anger message. The message is about the danger that COVID-19 presents to the health of one's family and community. The best way to protect them is by getting vaccinated and working together that enough people get vaccinated. It then asks the participant to imagine the anger they will feel if they don't get vaccinated and spread the disease. And there are many of these. I won't go through all of them, but this is what they're doing. They're testing which one of these propaganda messages work best on Americans, using our money to propagandize us into being guinea pigs for Big Pharma and Fauci and Gates and all the elites.
See, this is exactly opposite of libertarianism and freedom, because one is collectivism, and everybody's dealt with a group, put them in this group, do this, and we test you, and then we know what to do for everybody, versus the individual. Even in investigation and research, when it was less government, it was the individuals and honest corporations participating, and there wasn't this type of coercion that goes on. But there was some good news this week.
Yes.
Comes out of Germany, Berlin, and you think that maybe even with their leader that you'd be suspicious of how things are going in Germany, but the grassroots Germans evidently have had enough of this. And maybe some of them even remember what true fascism and Nazism is, and they went out in large numbers this week and demonstrated. And they weren't demonstrating to support Fauci and Gates. They were supporting, get out of our way, we'll take care of ourselves, just get rid of all the lockdown. That's good.
Yeah, let's do the first, if we can move to that first picture from Germany. They called it Day of Freedom, the Day of Freedom, and the estimate was, if we can blow that up, it's incredible. The estimate was up to 1 million people and maybe more were in the streets of Berlin. We can go to the next one as well. Look at this, Dr. Paul. This is the Brandenburg Gate.
Wow.
Absolutely packed, full of Germans. And just do another one, too. And I watched a lot of this live. See, they're protesting against the mask. Nobody's wearing a mask there. Look at that. Contrast that even to Texas, where we value our independence. And, no one's wearing a mask. 1 million people in the streets saying we've had enough. We're taking back our freedom. And I watched it live, and they were just average people. But the New York Times, and you mentioned this in your piece today, you really captured it. The New York Times called them all a bunch of Nazis and conspiracy theorists. That's how they just discount anyone. But there were also protests elsewhere in Europe, and I think UK, Netherlands, other places. People are getting fed up. They're demanding their freedom. They're taking off their masks. They've had it, and that's a very good news story.
The way I see what's happening in our country is something is being accomplished that foreign enemies never could. We've lived through the 20th century. We had the fascists and the communists and the violence and the wars and all, but we never gave up our liberties. But now we're doing this, and it's internal. That's why the founders were smart enough to talk about foreign and domestic. We're doing this to ourselves. I mean, no invader came in, but it was an invasion of ideas, an invasion of demagoguery, lying, and people have been coerced. And this just didn't pop up in the last month or two. This has been popping up probably since the 30s as the infiltration of the professors who teach this stuff.
Yeah.
You raised up a generation after a generation. That's the way I could see it very clearly in Washington, how the education system of the last 40 or 50 years taught everybody to be a Keynesian and not even know about a monetary system. I had one person, which was a pretty weird story, somebody on the banking committee, after I brought up the subject of gold, and it talked a little bit about it, and the congresswoman came over to me afterwards and had to be a little quiet. She said, "Ron, are we still on the gold standard?" And I thought, she's been to public school, and this is what's going on here. They listen to this, and we're doing it to ourselves. That's what's so sad. But that's also the reason that I claim it's an ideological war. There's now violence coming about it, but that's secondary. That's secondary because what's going to happen if Antifa and Black Lives Matter keep doing this and burning the cities down, believe me, there's going to be retaliation. But I think it's amazingly quiet compared to the damage done to the cities and the outrage of people doing this and the police joining them, mayors joining them, and then going back trying to get money from us, the people who didn't do it, and then they say, "Oh yeah, the federal government needs to come in here and rebuild this city." It's just so weird and odd and evil.
Well, I'm not big on walls, but I sort of wish they'd build a wall around Texas because all these people are trying to escape the mayhem and they're going to come over here. But it is dangerous. And I wonder now, even if some of our big leaders are starting to wake up to the damage they caused with what they've done to our economy and our society. And we both saw that Scott Gottlieb, the former FDA director, he was on CNBC Squawk Box, I think, over the weekend. And he said, well, hang on a little bit. We need to strike a balance between lockdown, which you mentioned, the governor of New Jersey, who's one of the worst, is put people on notice, we're going to lock you down. We've got to do a balance between that and our need to fight the disease. He's trying to sound moderate. I think he's trying to triangulate his message because he sees what's happening. And, our thought when seeing that was, too little, too late. Now you tell us, after you look around and see the absolute and utter devastation, and it's all starting to hit. You probably saw things over the weekend about evictions starting, mass evictions of people. They haven't paid their rent since April when they lost their jobs. The fight for more free money to people who have had their livelihoods taken away from them. So I think they are starting to wake up and look around, and I hope they will continue to do so and start feeling some heat.
Some people have a misunderstanding of what it would be like in a libertarian society. That mean no mask, no mask? No, there's no prohibition.
Yeah.
It's voluntary. But this whole idea of the mask is supposed to, protect everybody. But the individual, if they don't wear the mask, if it's protecting that individual, he takes his own risk. But if you didn't have the government there dependent and responsible for everybody's every illness, and then they use the argument, oh yeah, he's going to get sick and we're going to have to take care of him. But now they can be fined, they can be jailed, and they can literally be incarcerated for this. But one of the worst punishments they're getting now, and this is not by accident, it is the attack by their fellow citizens, their fellow community people, because the anger that is shown, with people who, all they have done is not wear their mask. I saw an episode the other day on somebody buying a pizza. The guy with the mask and wanted to discipline the customer got so angry he turned around and dumped all the showcases over. He was just like a wild man. And that is some real fear that we should have. And that's why it is good to have people as calm as possible when we're refuting them. And we have to refute them with facts, and also hopefully the violence doesn't get worse. Some of this violence is directed, we really justify, defending your own property.
Yeah.
But they're turning this around and saying that, we're going to attack them because it has nothing to do with their privacy, because they are a threat. They are intimidating. They are spreading the disease. They are the evil people. So therefore, because they won't wear the mask, they have become the most evil person as possible. But they won't look at history. History parties on our side of this that'll tone it down a little bit without saying that there's no problem. I mean, people do die from this, but more people are dying because of the lockdown. And we've talked about it so much that has ramifications, not for this month or next month or getting jobs. This has a ramification probably for a generation of the mistreatment of our young people.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to grow up. We already had a disintegration of the family over the last 30 or 40 years, and that's just not in the minority community. That's overall, which is one of the major reasons we're facing this problem. But then when you come in and the government then threatens the situation and puts people locked down, if there's not a strong family, what kind of a group are they getting locked down in? And not going out. We've gone the wrong way, and we've made it a lot worse. And hopefully, we wake up soon.
Yeah, I can't help but wondering if some of those people who are flipping their lids are starting to get the feeling that they've been cheated. They've been wearing their masks this whole time, and they're starting to get a feeling that, you know what, I feel like I'm being cheated. And there's no one that gets more angrier than when they find out they've been cheated. But there still is no evidence that the lockdowns have done anything. If you look at places like San Francisco where they've been tighter than a drum, the cases still go up. If you look at other places where they've been locked down, the cases still go up. There's a phrase going around the alternative analysis community in this, virus gone a virus, meaning that viruses behave like viruses no matter what you do. And, and that seems to be the case. But, you mentioned masks. And I'm reminded of a great quote from George Carlin, the great comedian. He said, "It's a big club and you ain't in it." And let's look at this next clip, because nothing describes this better than this next clip. Keep going on next to the next one. DC mask mandate exempts lawmakers and government employees. This is the DC Mayor Muriel Bowser, Democrat. She put on draconian measures. Everyone over 2 years old must wear a mask indoors and outdoors. Absolutely draconian. But then you read down in her big executive order, and this tells you it's a big club and you ain't in it. The enforcement provisions of this order shall not be applied to persons in the judicial or legislative branch of the district government while those persons are on duty, and shall not apply to any employees of the federal government while they are on duty. So I guess Corona doesn't spread among government officials.
Now, that was a public announcement. Everybody would have had access to this. The media would have had access to it. And the media could very well have asked her a question. Why do you do that? Why do you exempt these special favors? But the media never gets put on the challenge. They're never challenged for this. They just keep marching along, going along with it, perpetuating a myth. But the biggest myth is that government is here to take care of us, make us safe and secure and happy, and you do what they tell us and you'll be part of the club and we'll take care of you. But of course the opposite happens. It destroys people. It destroys their incentives and their sensibilities, and it destroys the economy. This is such a strong example. Not only does it involve, the expenditures and the inflation and the Federal Reserve and the foreign policy, it's a demonstration that people should wake up to the fact that this doesn't happen by accident. It happens because some people's in there and they have bad ideas, and the other people have only got 90% or more have gotten their ideas, from government schools, and they perpetuate this. Fortunately, though, we have seen some encouragement in the homeschooling business.
Yeah.
There's some pretty good clips out there. People who have been exposed to homeschooling, completely different attitude, and you say, well, that's just a couple people. Yeah, but it's the cream of the crop, and that's what makes the difference, because it's only the cream of the crop, negative and positively, is it's only a few people who drive things, and everybody else has to go along. That's why this propaganda stuff we're talking about is so important. They get people to go along, and I don't think we can change that. We just have to have a message that's appealing. And I keep complaining. Our message is so powerful, so wonderful. We're dealing with liberty. It's defended morally and constitutionally, why won't more people, come our way? And I think it's, the greed factor. They're taught that greed is, they don't call it greed. They just say, well, you're entitled to it.
Yeah.
Everybody's entitled to be taken care of because you've been punished. You're a victim, and therefore, and people fall into it. And then the people who are, forced to help take care of them, they say, oh, you're a racist or something else. They'll make them go on a guilt trip. And it's a big undertaking to reverse that. But that's where I'm optimistic. I think there's attitudes being changed, and there's a lot of people. Germany, just think of that. How many did you say?
Over 1 million, they say.
80 people. And that is just great. What a difference from the time, I was a kid and we had relatives in Germany, but we were, in family-wise, we were struggling, with our family over there, and we're fighting and killing them, and now look at this. So, and this is in spite of their prime minister. Their prime minister's not on our side on this.
No, not at all. Well, I'll close with another chart because I like charts. Maybe I'm just a simple person, but this really underscores the point that lockdowns don't work. And also remind our viewers that we're going to thank our super chatters after the show. So just to let you know. But let's put up this last chart. This is a tweet someone put out. Tennessee has restaurants at 100 capacity and bars have been open since May. That's being blocked now, if we can close that.
There we go.
North Carolina has restaurants at 50% capacity and bars are still closed. Sure makes a difference, no? So the orange line is North Carolina, and the blue line is Tennessee. Tennessee relatively open, 100% capacity and bars open. The orange line is 50% capacity and bars closed. There should be a huge divergence if lockdown works. If these measures work, these lines should be going the opposite from each other instead of what they are. And Dr. Paul, there's this kind of stuff all over the place. They just don't work, and that's important. So keep that in mind. They're lying to you, they're propagandizing you, but you already know that. Thanks for supporting us. Thanks for being super chatters. Our wonderful people are going to be named after the show who supported us over the last week. And thanks a lot. Dr. Paul?
Very good. I, too, right now lean towards some optimism that we want to cling to and build on. But I also am a realist. I understand how difficult it is. But I'm confident and I'm comfortable with what we do because I'm really very pleased with the issue and the message. Because if I was trying to promote a message which was watered down and pretend and you had to distort and maybe do a little good here but not over here and you trade votes and do that, it's nonsense. Because once you start trading, the issue is trading. If you have a program which is at a certain stage and you say, well, they come to me and say, well, what we would like to do is reduce it by 5%. Would you vote for the bill then? No. I said 5%, if you have even at 5% of it, you endorse the principle. It's the principle of the thing. So whether it's a government program or whatever we're doing, the principles of liberty, you say, well, that's impractical. You're never going to have 100% freedom. No, you're not. The problem and the question is, how do you deal with the imperfections of society? And I'll tell you one conclusion I've come to. Government's not the solution. Believe me, government is not. They create more problems than they help, just like we talk endlessly about how lockdown works. It makes more problems, doesn't do what they claim they're going to do. So it's just a distortion. So that's why it's important to know and understand what is the philosophy that we believe in. And that is the purpose of government ought to be to protect liberty. The responsibility should be on which group? Which group should it be? The small group, the individual, and then build from there. Individuals getting together with friends and neighbors and husbands and wives and children and family and work on the problems. And then doing it voluntarily. Everything should be voluntary. And believe me, this whole mess of lockdown could have been voluntary. And believe me, maybe the natural people who believe that there is a natural cure and a natural way to take care of viruses, they would have at least had a hearing. But we don't get a hearing now very much. So we want a chance to get the message out, and that is why the First Amendment is so important, and it's being under siege as well. But the message is out there. the number of people who are understanding it, the number of people who support it, they're growing in numbers, and it can be reversed. I think it's a wonderful story of what we just talked about, what's happening in Germany. 1 million people turning on and saying, enough is enough. We want our freedom back. We don't want the government telling us what to do. And that used to be a pretty bad authoritarian government, and this to me is wonderful. And we want to again thank our viewers very much for tuning in today, and please come back to the Liberty Report soon.